Hello guys, so today we'll be talking about the amendments. The amendments we'll be talking today are the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, 19th, 22nd, and 26th Amendment. So the 16th Amendment talks about how Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, regardless of social rank or economic stability. So basically, it didn't matter if you were rich or you were poor, everyone had to pay. The amendment was needed because the financial requirements of the Civil War prompted the first American income tax in 1861, and conservatives, hoping to kill the idea for good, proposed a constitutional amendment enacting such tax. They believed an amendment would never receive ratification by three-fourths of the. However, the 16th Amendment was ratified by one state legislature after another, and on February 25, 1913, with the certification by Secretary of State Philander Knox, the 16th Amendment took effect. The one who worked towards this amendment was President William Howard Taft. The 16th Amendment, however, did have some issues. The problem with this amendment was that it established the lantern differences existing between direct and indirect taxes. The amendment states that certain income tax be considered as an excise. Indirect tax, however, taxation with regard of property, rental, and interest were considered to be direct taxes. As a result, such taxes were moved under the jurisdiction of the federal government. The overall effect or impact of this amendment was that it gave the federal government the right to collect income tax. The 17th Amendment of the Constitution calls for the direct election of senators by the legislature. It was proposed on May 13, 1912 and ratified to April 8, 1943. The 17th Amendment, this amendment was needed to prevent chaos because certain states used popular vote to cast the representatives of the state. The 17th Amendment obstacle that this amendment encountered was race rider, which meant to bar federal among voters, which was needed to be done by vesting complete control of the Senate. The overall impact of this amendment was that it ended corruption because senators are now chosen by the people and not by the Senate itself. The 18th Amendment of the United States Constitution prohibits the manufacturing, selling, or distribution of alcoholic beverages. The 18th Amendment began with the temperance movement. People argued that alcohol made men poor, violent, and caused tragedies. The 18th Amendment was pushed mainly by the temperance movement, with whom the majority of the participants were women. In other words, the temperance movement was a group of social reformers who argued that alcohol caused many issues. An obstacle that the 18th Amendment faced was that it took a whole organization to protest the temperance movement against the use of alcohol, and it did not address major issues such as the prohibition. The 18th Amendment took about 394 days to get ratified. The effects were very unpleasing to the temperance movement because it only led to more crime. Traffickants from everywhere would transport liquor. It did not stop these people from drinking alcohol beverages. So basically they had a black market, and they had like underground places where they would meet and sell and drink liquor and alcohol. The 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment offered women the right to vote. This amendment states that gender should not play a role upon casting a vote for politics. Women were expected to focus on housework and motherhood, not politics. Women were seen as ignorant and naive when talking about authoritative figures. The 19th Amendment. In July 1848, 200 women suffragists, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, met to assert the right of women to vote. Reformers Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the first women's rights convention at the Seneca Falls in New York. Because society still infringed in giving politic rights to women, the process was lengthy and women's suffrages was beginning to disintegrate. Women were also losing patience. Also, not all women wanted the right to vote. By the 1920s, women's role was beginning to change drastically. Women were working more, receiving a better education, bearing fewer children, and several states had authorized female suffrage. It ratified around the 1920s. 22nd Amendment. The 22nd Amendment limits the number of terms the president may serve, allowing only 2 terms. Each term is equivalent to 4 years, so the most a president can essentially serve is 8 years. It was ratified in 1951. It was passed in the reaction to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 4 terms in office, a total of 16 years. After Roosevelt died in 1945, many Americans began to recognize that having a president serve more than 8 years was bad for the country. Congress and people worked to ratify this amendment. The 22nd Amendment was finally passed by Congress in 1947 and ratified by the states in 1951. Last but not least, the 26th Amendment. The 26th Amendment states, "The right of citizens of the United States who are 18 years of age or older to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of age." The 28th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. The 26th Amendment argued that if a young man was able to go to war, he should be old enough to vote. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote became a common slogan for the youth voting rights movement, and in 1943, Georgia became the first state to lower its voting age in its local elections from 21 to 18. People who supported this movement were young men who were being drafted to go to war. In the 1970s case Oregon versus Mitchell, the ratification of the amendment divided the Supreme Court. The court believed that Congress lacked the right to even for federal elections, and that under the Constitution only the states have the right to set voter qualifications. The ratification of this amendment took only 2 months. The overall impact of this amendment was that voting age was lowered to 18, so people no longer have to wait to turn 21 to vote, giving them 3 less years. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something.